The desert was silent in a way that felt heavy and cruel, as if it was holding its breath. The sun hung high in the sky, pouring down heat that burned the skin and drained all strength from the land. Not a single cloud offered mercy. In the middle of this harsh wilderness stood an old dead cottonwood tree, its twisted branches reaching out like dry bones. This place was far from any town or trail, chosen carefully because no one came here anymore. It was a place where screams could disappear and suffering could be forgotten. That morning, the desert became a witness to an act of terrible cruelty. 7 Apache girls were dragged across the sand toward the tree. Their feet left weak lines. Behind them, soon erased by the wind. They were young, frightened, and exhausted, their faces marked with dust and tears. Their hands were tied tightly, cutting into their skin, but no one cared. The men who brought them here showed no kindness. In their eyes, only anger and fear mixed together. These men believed they were delivering justice, but in truth, they were acting on hatred and lies. They did not listen to the girls' cries or their pleas of innocence. To them, the girls were already guilty. The ropes were thrown over the thick branches of the dead tree. One by one, the girls were pushed forward, their bodies shaking as the ropes tightened around their necks. Some of them cried out for their mothers. Others whispered prayers to the spirits they believed still walked the land. The desert wind carried their voices away, breaking them into pieces before they could reach anyone. The men worked quickly, not wanting to stay long. Fear sat in their hearts too, fear of what they were doing and fear of being seen. When the last knot was tied, they stepped back and looked at their work with cold faces. The girls were left hanging, their feet barely touching the ground. The ropes did not break their necks. Instead, they left them slowly choking, suspended between life and death. Their bodies twisted slightly as they struggled to breathe, each breath shallow and painful. The sun burned their skin, and sweat ran down their faces, mixing with dust and tears. Flies gathered around them, and the smell of dry earth filled their lungs. Time moved slowly, cruelly, as if it wanted to watch them suffer. As the men mounted their horses, one of the girls let out a weak cry, begging for mercy. For a brief moment, one man hesitated. His hand tightened on the reins, and his eyes flickered with doubt. But the others urged him on, reminding him that mercy had no place in the Wild West. Soon the sound of hooves faded into the distance, leaving the girls alone with the desert and their pain. Silence returned, thick and unforgiving. The hours passed and the sun climbed higher. The girls' strength began to fade. Some lost consciousness, their heads falling forward as their bodies went still. Others forced their eyes open, fighting to stay awake, knowing that sleep might mean death. Memories filled their minds, green valleys, running water, laughter shared with sisters and friends. These memories were all they had left to hold on to. The desert offered nothing but heat and cruelty in return. Above them, birds circled slowly in the sky, watching with dark, patient eyes. They had seen this before. The land had seen many deaths, many injustices, and it did not react anymore. The cottonwood tree stood silent, its dead branches offering no shade, no comfort. The wind brushed against the girls' faces like a final goodbye, but still no help came. Far away, beyond the ridges and open plains, life continued as if nothing terrible was happening. No one knew what was taking place under that dead tree. No one heard the faint sounds of struggle or the whispered prayers. The world moved on, unaware that 7 innocent lives were slipping away, breath by painful breath. In that lonely corner of the Wild West, cruelty ruled the day, and hope seemed to have no place left to stand. The sun continued its slow, cruel journey across the sky, showing no care for the suffering beneath it. The heat grew heavier with every passing hour, pressing down on the 7 Apache girls like an unseen weight. Their bodies hung weakly from the ropes, swaying slightly whenever the hot wind passed through. Each movement sent sharp pain through their necks and chests, reminding them that death was close, waiting patiently. The desert did not rush. It allowed suffering to stretch, to deepen, to drain every last bit of strength. Some of the girls had already lost feeling in their legs. Their toes barely touched the ground, offering false hope, while the ropes continued to steal their breath. One girl tried to lift her head, her lips cracking as she whispered her sister's name. No sound came out, only a dry breath that burned her throat. Another girl closed her eyes, not to give up, but to escape the sight of the endless sand and the dead tree that had become their prison. In her mind, she walked freely again beside a river, her feet cool in the water, her heart light. The memory felt real, but it faded quickly, pulled away by pain. The wind carried small sounds across the desert, soft gasps, broken sobs, quiet prayers. Each girl prayed in her own way. Some spoke to the spirits of their ancestors, asking for strength. Others begged the land itself to show mercy. Their voices were weak, barely more than breath, and no one was close enough to hear them. Even if someone had been passing nearby, the wind would have stolen the sound before it could reach human ears. The desert kept their secrets well. As time dragged on, fear slowly turned into something deeper and heavier. It became sorrow. The girls began to understand that help might never come. Their thoughts turned to the people they loved, the mothers who would wait for them, the younger siblings who would ask where they had gone, the fathers who would search the land with broken hearts. The pain of those thoughts hurt more than the ropes. Dying was frightening, but dying seen and unheard felt cruel beyond words. One of the girls began to tremble as her body weakened. Her breathing became slow and uneven, and her head dropped forward. The others noticed and tried to speak to her, to keep her awake, but their voices were too weak. They watched helplessly. As her struggle faded, the sun reflected off the sand, blinding them, making it hard to tell if her chest still moved. Fear spread through the group like a shadow, silent but powerful. They knew that once one of them was gone, the rest would soon follow. Above them, vultures circled lower now. Their wings moved slowly, calmly, as if they had all the time in the world. The girls could see them clearly, dark shapes against the bright sky. The sight filled them with terror. The birds were a promise of what was coming. The desert had already decided their fate, or so it seemed. Every beat of their hearts felt weaker than the last. The cottonwood tree stood unchanged, unmoved by their suffering. Its bark was dry and cracked, just like their lips. No leaves rustled to offer comfort. No shade protected them from the sun. The tree had become a symbol of the world's cruelty, strong enough to hold their weight, but dead enough to feel nothing. The ropes cut deeper as their bodies grew heavier with exhaustion. Far away, a faint sound drifted through the air. It was so distant that none of the girls were sure it was real. It could have been the wind. It could have been imagination. Hope had hurt them too much to trust it. Still, one girl lifted her head slightly, her eyes searching the horizon through blurred vision. She saw nothing but sand and heat waves dancing in the distance. Slowly, her head fell back again. The hours passed, unnoticed by the world. The girls' voices grew weaker, their prayers quieter. The desert remained silent, uncaring, endless. It seemed as if the land itself had turned away from them. Yet, somewhere beyond the empty plains, fate was already moving. The girls did not know it, but their suffering had not gone completely unseen. Not yet. The rancher rode alone across the wide, open land, his horse moving slowly under the weight of the heat and the long day. The sun was still high, and the air shimmered above the ground. Dust rose with every step of the horse's hooves, settling on the rancher's boots and coat. He did not hurry. He never did anymore. Life had taught him that rushing only led to trouble, and trouble had already taken too much from him in the past. His name was known in a few small towns, but he kept his distance from people now. Once he had been different. He had believed in stepping in when things were wrong, in helping those who could not help themselves. That belief had cost him dearly. Years ago, he had tried to stop a violent act not far from this very land. He had arrived too late. Innocent. Blood had stained the ground, and the cries of the helpless had followed him into his sleep ever since. From that day on, he told himself to stay out of other people's troubles. The Wild West was not kind to men who cared too much. As he rode, his eyes scanned the horizon out of habit. Long years on the frontier had taught him to watch for danger, for movement that did not belong. Still, his mind was far away, trapped in memories he could not escape. He remembered faces filled with fear, the sound of pleading voices, and the feeling of helpless anger burning in his chest. Those memories were the reason he rode alone now, choosing silence over company. The land around him felt strangely quiet. Even for the desert, something was different. No birds called out. No insects buzzed in the heat. It was the kind of silence that made a man uneasy, the kind that made old instincts stir. The rancher slowed his horse, his hand resting lightly near his rifle. He told himself it was nothing. The desert often played tricks on the mind. But deep down, a heavy feeling settled in his chest. As he crested a small rise, a dry wind brushed against his face. It carried with it a faint smell, sweat, dust, and something else he could not place. His horse snorted softly, shifting beneath him. Animals often sensed danger before humans did. The rancher frowned and gently urged the horse forward, his eyes narrowing as he studied the land ahead. Memories returned without warning. He saw himself younger, riding hard toward trouble, believing he could change things. He remembered the moment he arrived too late, the moment he realized that courage did not always win. That failure had carved deep lines into his soul. Since then, he had lived by one rule: survive and do not get involved. It was the only way to stay alive in a land ruled by violence and greed. Yet, as he rode on, that rule began to feel heavy. The silence pressed down on him, stirring something he thought was long dead. Guilt, responsibility, the sense that turning away was sometimes just another kind of crime. He shook his head, trying to push the thoughts away. He reminded himself that the West was full of suffering, and one man could not fix it all. In the distance, something broke the endless line of sand and stone. At first, it looked like nothing, more than a dark shape against the bright land. The rancher slowed again, squinting into the heat waves. A tree stood alone out there, old and dead. That was not unusual. What caught his attention was the strange shape beneath it. Something hung there, unmoving, unnatural. His heart began to beat faster, though he did not yet know why. He had seen enough in his life to recognize when something was wrong. The horse sensed it too, its ears pulling back as it hesitated. The rancher swallowed hard, his mouth suddenly dry. Part of him wanted to turn away, to follow the path he had chosen years ago. Another part, the part he tried to bury, urged him forward. He took a deep breath and guided the horse toward the tree. With every step, the dark shape became clearer, and the weight of the past pressed harder on his chest. Whatever waited ahead, he knew one thing for certain. If he rode away now, the ghosts of his past would never let him rest. As the rancher drew closer, the strange shapes beneath the dead tree slowly became clear, and his breath caught in his throat. What he first thought were shadows turned into human forms, hanging unnaturally still in the burning heat. 7 young girls were tied to the thick branches, their bodies slumped forward, their feet barely brushing the sand. The sight struck him like a sudden blow to the chest. His horse stopped on its own, snorting nervously, as if it too understood the horror standing before them. For a long moment, the rancher did not move. He simply stared, his mind refusing to accept what his eyes were showing him. The desert around them remained silent, almost respectful, as if it knew something terrible had been done here. The sun shone without mercy, lighting every detail, the tight ropes, the dusty skin, the shallow rise and fall of a few chests still fighting for air. Some of the girls did not move at all. Others trembled weakly, their strength nearly gone. He slid off his horse slowly, his boots sinking into the hot sand. Each step toward the tree felt heavy, as if the ground itself was trying to hold him. Back, his heart pounded, and memories rushed back with painful force. He had seen scenes like this before, too many times. Each one had left a scar that never truly healed. He clenched his jaw, forcing himself to focus on the present. These were not memories. These were living people. Or at least some of them still were. As he came closer, one of the girls lifted her head slightly. Her eyes were half open, glassy and unfocused, but they moved just enough to see him. Her lips parted, and a sound escaped, so weak it barely reached his ears. It was not a word, just a breath filled with pain and hope tangled together. That sound broke something inside him. All the promises he had made to himself to stay away, to survive. By keeping his distance fell apart in that instant. The rancher reached the tree and looked up at the ropes. They were tied carefully, cruelly, meant to make death slow. His hands shook as he touched one of the ropes, feeling how tight it was against the girl's neck. The skin beneath was raw and bruised. He swallowed hard, fighting the anger rising in his chest. Whoever had done this had not been in a hurry. They had wanted suffering. He checked each girl as quickly as he could. Some were barely breathing, their chests moving in shallow, uneven patterns. One hung completely still, her head slumped forward. He pressed 2 fingers gently to her neck, searching for a pulse. There was none. His jaw tightened, and he closed his eyes for a brief moment, honoring the life already lost. Then he forced himself to move on. The others still needed him. The desert felt suddenly dangerous. Anyone who could do this might return. The rancher's eyes scanned the horizon again and again, searching for dust clouds, for movement, for any sign of approaching riders. He knew time was against him. Every second the girls remained hanging, death crept closer. His mind raced, weighing risks and choices. He was alone. Helping them could cost him his life, but leaving them was no longer an option. He pulled out his knife, the blade catching the sunlight. His hands were steady now, guided by a purpose stronger than fear. He reached up and cut the first rope. The girl collapsed into his arms, light as a child, her body weak and burning hot. He lowered her gently to the ground, laying her in the wind, the thin shade of the tree trunk, though it offered little relief. Her breathing was shallow, but she was alive. One by one, he moved from rope to rope, cutting carefully, catching each girl as they fell. His muscles burned, sweat pouring down his face, mixing with dust and grief. With each life he lowered, the weight on his chest grew heavier. He did not know if he was saving them or simply delaying the inevitable, but he refused to stop. When the last rope fell, the rancher stepped back, chest heaving, surrounded by 7 broken bodies in the sand. The desert remained silent, watching. He knelt among them, knowing the hardest part was still to come. Saving them now meant facing whoever had done this and whatever fate waited next. The rancher knelt in the hot sand, surrounded by the 7 girls whose lives now rested in his hands. The sun showed no mercy, beating down on them all, as if time itself was an enemy. Sweat ran down his face and into his eyes, but he did not stop moving. He knew that standing still, even for a moment, could mean losing them. Death was close, closer than he wanted to admit, and it waited patiently. He checked each girl again, one by one. Some were breathing so lightly that it was hard to see their chests move. Their skin burned with heat, their lips cracked and dry. The ropes had left deep marks on their necks, angry and swollen. One girl stirred slightly, letting out a weak sound, and the rancher felt a small surge of hope. That sound meant life. It meant there was still a chance. He tore open his water canteen and carefully poured a few drops onto a cloth, pressing it gently against their lips. He knew better than to give them too much at once. Years on the frontier had taught him how fragile life could be in the desert. He spoke softly as he worked, even though he did not know if they could hear him. His voice was calm, steady, meant to anchor them to the world. "Stay with me," he said quietly. "Don't let go." The girl who had first made a sound tried to open her eyes. They fluttered weakly, struggling against exhaustion. Her gaze did not focus, but her breathing grew a little stronger. The rancher nodded to himself. Small signs mattered now. Every breath was a victory. Every moment they stayed alive pushed death a step farther away. He dragged their bodies closer together, placing them where the tree cast the smallest shadow. It was not much, but it was all he had. His hands moved quickly but carefully, aware that rough movements could cause more harm. As he worked, his ears stayed alert, listening for any sound that did not belong to the desert. He feared the men might return at any moment. If they did, there would be no time left. One of the girls suddenly gasped, her body jerking as if waking from a nightmare. Her hands twitched, fingers curling weakly into the sand. The rancher rushed to her side, holding her shoulders gently, keeping her calm. Her eyes opened wider now, filled with fear and confusion. She tried to speak, but her throat could only manage a broken sound. Tears rolled down her dusty cheeks. She was alive, truly alive, but not all signs were good. He checked the girl who had not moved since he cut her down. Her skin was cooler now, her face still. He pressed his ear to her chest, hoping against hope to hear something. There was nothing, no breath, no heartbeat. The rancher closed his eyes and lowered his head for a moment. The desert had already claimed one life, and there was nothing he could do to change that. Grief threatened to slow him down, but he pushed it aside. There would be time for sorrow later. Right now the living needed him. He forced himself to focus, to keep moving. He used his knife to cut away the tight bindings around their wrists, freeing their swollen hands. Blood slowly returned to their fingers, and some of them groaned softly in pain. Pain, he knew, was a good sign. The heat felt unbearable now, like fire pressing down from the sky. The rancher's shirt clung to his back, soaked with sweat. His arms ached, his legs trembled, but he refused to stop. He had not fought death like this in years. It felt familiar and terrifying all at once. He wondered if this was why fate had led him here, to this exact place, at this exact moment. Suddenly, the wind shifted, carrying a distant sound across the sand. The rancher froze, lifting his head. Hoofbeats, faint, but real. His heart slammed against his ribs. Someone was coming. He did not know if it was help or danger, but his body prepared for the worst. He looked down at the girls, so weak, so defenseless. Leaving them was not an option. He reached for his rifle, placing it within easy reach while keeping his eyes on the horizon. The dust in the distance began to rise, thin lines cutting through the heat waves. Whoever was coming would arrive soon. The rancher took a deep breath, positioning himself between the girls and the open desert. He had raced against death and bought them time. Now he might have to race against men willing to kill. The dust on the horizon grew thicker with every passing second. The rancher did not need to guess anymore. Riders were coming. The sound of hooves cut through the desert silence like a warning cry, sharp and clear. His jaw tightened as he stood up slowly, placing himself in front of the girls. Behind him, their weak breathing mixed with the hot wind, a fragile reminder of what he was fighting for. He scanned the land, counting the shapes moving closer. Horses, several of them. His heart sank, but his face remained hard and calm. These were not travelers or lost souls. He knew that instinctively. The way they rode, fast and careless, spoke. Of men who feared nothing and cared even less. The same men who had tied the ropes. The same men who had walked away and left 7 girls to die. The girls sensed the change before they understood it. One of them stirred, her eyes opening wider as fear returned. Another tried to push herself up but collapsed weakly into the sand. Panic spread quietly among them, heavy and choking. They did not have the strength to run. They did not even have the strength to scream. All they could do was look at the rancher, their eyes filled with silent questions and desperate hope. The rancher raised his rifle and rested it against his shoulder, keeping the barrel pointed low for now. His fingers were steady, but his chest burned with anger. He had seen cruelty before, but this was beyond reason. The heat, the ropes, the slow death, it had all been planned. These men had wanted suffering, and now they had returned, perhaps to finish what they started. As the riders came into view, the rancher recognized their faces. Hard eyes, dust-covered coats, smiles that held no warmth. One of them laughed when he saw the girls lying on the ground. Another spat into the sand, disappointed that some of them still lived. Their leader rode a few steps ahead, his posture relaxed, as if nothing here deserved concern. "Well now," the leader said, his voice carrying easily across the open. "Land. Looks like someone got curious." The rancher did not reply. He stepped forward instead, placing his body fully between the men and the girls. The leader's smile faded slightly as he noticed the rifle. His eyes narrowed, measuring the situation. He had not expected resistance, certainly not from one man. "You should ride away," the rancher said, his voice low and firm. "This doesn't end well if you don't." The men laughed again, but there was tension beneath the sound. They circled slowly, spreading out, trying to surround him. They knew the game. Strength in numbers, fear through pressure. The rancher's mind raced, calculating distances, movements, chances. He was outnumbered, but he had something they did not, nothing left to lose. "These girls were judged," the leader said coldly. "You got no right interfering." The rancher's eyes burned with fury. "They were tortured," he replied, "and you know it." For a brief moment, silence fell. Even the wind seemed to pause, then the leader's face hardened. He raised his hand slightly, and the others shifted, ready. The threat was clear. One wrong move, and blood would spill into the sand. Behind the rancher, one of the girls let out a soft cry, her fear breaking through. That sound snapped something inside him. The past rushed back, the memories of arriving too late, of standing over bodies he could not save. He would not let that happen again, not today. The first shot rang out like thunder. The rancher fired before the men could react, his bullet striking the ground near the leader's horse, sending it rearing back in panic. Chaos followed. Horses screamed, men shouted, and dust exploded into the air. The rancher moved quickly, firing again, forcing the riders to scatter. He used the land, the tree, every small rise for cover. His movements were sharp, controlled, driven by pure survival. The men fired back, bullets tearing through the air, kicking up sand around him. One shot grazed his arm, burning like fire, but he ignored it. Pain meant nothing now. Every second he held them off was a second the girl stayed alive. The fight felt endless, though it lasted only moments. Finally, one of the men fell from his horse, wounded and screaming. The others hesitated. They had not expected this kind of resistance. The leader cursed loudly, his face twisted with rage and frustration. "This isn't over," he shouted. "You hear me?" The men pulled back, retreating into the desert, their threats swallowed by distance. The dust slowly settled, leaving behind silence once more. The rancher lowered his rifle, his chest heaving. His body ached, his arm burned, but he was still standing. He turned back toward the girls, knowing the danger was not truly gone. But for now, they were alive. The desert slowly grew quiet again, but the silence felt different now. It was no longer empty. It was heavy, filled with the echoes of gunshots, shouted threats, and pain that had not yet faded. The rancher stood still for a moment, listening, carefully making sure the riders were truly gone. Only when the wind returned, brushing softly across the sand, did he lower his rifle completely. His hands trembled, not from fear, but from everything his body had been holding back. He turned toward the girls and hurried to them, dropping to his knees despite the pain in his wounded arm. Blood had soaked through his sleeve, but he ignored it. The girls mattered more. Their faces were pale, eyes wide with shock. Some were crying silently. Others stared at him as if he were not real, as if he might disappear the way hope so often did. He spoke gently, telling them it was over, that they were safe for now. His voice was calm, but his heart was still racing. One of the girls reached out with a shaking hand and touched his coat, as if to make sure he was truly there. Tears streamed down her face as relief finally broke through her fear. Another girl whispered a few broken words of thanks, her voice barely louder than the wind. The rancher nodded, unable to speak for a moment. He had faced guns and danger before, but this gratitude, this trust, hit him deeper than any bullet ever could. He continued tending to them, tearing strips from his shirt to wrap around their injured necks and wrists. He worked slowly and carefully, knowing their bodies were fragile. As he helped them, the truth of what had happened began to surface in broken pieces. Through weak voices and shaking breaths, the girls spoke of being accused without proof, of being taken from their camp, of fear and confusion turning into terror. Their words were simple, but the meaning behind them was heavy and painful. The rancher listened, his jaw tight, anger burning deep inside him. There was no doubt now. The girls were innocent. They had always been innocent. What had been done to them was not justice, it's cruelty hiding behind excuses. The Wild West often spoke of law and order, but out here, power decided everything. And too often, power chose violence. He looked around at the ground near the tree, at the broken ropes, the marks in the sand, the place where one girl had lost her life. Justice felt small in a land like this. Too often, wrongs went unanswered, buried by time and distance. But, standing there, surrounded by survivors, the rancher knew he could not let this end in silence. Not again. With great effort, he helped the girls sit up and drink small amounts of water. Their strength was slowly returning, but they were far from safe. Night would come soon, and the desert grew colder and more dangerous after sunset. He knew they needed shelter, medical care, and protection. Leaving them here was not an option. Turning away was not an option. Those choices belonged to the man he used to be, not the man he had become today. As the sun began to lower, painting the sky in deep orange and red, the rancher made a decision. He would take them to the nearest settlement, even if it meant facing questions, threats, or retaliation. The men who did this might return. They might spread lies. But the truth was stronger than fear, and these girls deserved to be seen, heard, and protected. One of the girls noticed the blood on his arm and tried to speak, worry in her eyes. He waved it away gently, offering a small, tired smile. "It'll heal," he said. "What matters is that you will too." His words were simple, but they carried a promise, not just of survival, but of dignity. As evening shadows stretched across the land, the rancher stood and looked once more at the dead tree. It had been a place of suffering, a symbol of cruelty. Now it stood behind them, powerless. Justice had not come from a court or a badge. It had come from a choice from one man refusing to walk away. The desert watched silently as the rancher prepared to lead the girls to safety. Dust and blood marked the ground, but so did footprints moving forward. In the unforgiving Wild West, justice did not always wear a uniform. Sometimes it rode alone, stood its ground, and chose humanity over fear,